Oh, Father, good starting of my day. Father, here I am once again with my heart in your hands. I doing what I believe you asked me to do. I'm here, Father, to share or allow myself to be utilized as your instrument for you to touch, to speak, whoever it is that you desire to reach. And the privilege, Father, is all mine to be the tool and the vessel, the instrument that you utilize to do so in the hearts and minds of men. So thank you, Father, for giving me purpose. Thank you, Father. I am humbled by everything you are and the fact that you would even consider using me to transmit your glory, your greatness. I am humbled, Father. Thank you, Father. I ask you, Father, today to let your Spirit speak, Father. And I'm not interested in having a fan base. I'm interested in getting your point across, Father. Or whatever it is that your Spirit desires to transmit, Father. Let it be so. In the name of your Son, Father, Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen. So today, I'm gonna talk about a small part of, this might be a long one, I'm not sure. Another part of my life that shaped my understanding, things that I remember from my childhood, even to this day, that were very meaningful and purposeful, and it has a lot to do with my dad, my father. And I'm gonna express my relationship with him, what I can remember, and the things that I remember with purpose, and what I have learned now as an adult, as the Father reveals to me, things that I have learned as an adult. About things that I've learned, that the Father has shown me of the characteristics, the character and decisions, the reasons for the decisions and things inside of the heart of my father, and the reason why he was the way he was. Not to excuse wherever he might have not made the best choices, but I'm going to express how I can understand that he wasn't a superhero. You know, he was a man, just like all of us, trying to figure things out. Now that I'm a father, I can understand that it's not easy. do all the correct things every time. So here it goes. Before I get to my father, it starts me as a child living basically at my grandmother's house by my mother's side. My mother and my grandmother's house. That's what I knew as a child. My father was never with my mother my whole life that I can remember. I only knew my father. That's when I started to have, consciousness of things. I can only remember my father as the weekend parent, so to speak. So I have meaningful memories of him, which I'll share some. Some very small details that engraved in my brain that I'll never be able to forget because they were so meaningful in a positive way. Even though my time with him was limited for many reasons. But yeah, so I grew up as a child in Cuba. So that, I guess that's also a factor. But I grew up as a child in my mother and my grandmother's house. It was a nice house, big house, because from what I understand, I never met my grandfather by my mom's side, but he was a merchant. He was a businessman from Spain, from what I understand. And I think before the whole Castro thing, before the whole communism dictatorship thing, a lot of folks from Spain and a lot of folks from different places settled in the island. And after everything happened, with Castro, a lot of people couldn't get out. It was those that remained were stuck there, basically. There was no more freedom go in and out. Cuba was, from my understanding and history, Cuba was a very free to come and go as you please type of island. It was very prosperous. Whatever advancements were in the United States, you could find in Cuba at a period of time. So I grew up there, and I didn't have my dad with me in the home where I was growing up, but every weekend or every other weekend or so, or once a month sometimes, he would show up and I would go to his house, which was up on the hill, just up on a hill from my mother's house. And he lived there in his parents' house, which was next to a military training facility. So on the other side of the hill was a steep drop, and on that ground on the other side of his house, of that hill, was military training ground, and they would shoot over there and practice and things like that. And in those limited times that I spent with my dad, it's where I had the most freedoms. It's where I had, freedom of just to be a kid and to grow and to learn and to roam around. I had friends of the neighborhood, you know, and little buddies from the neighborhood that, you know, that we would play together and run around barefooted, you know, half the time, and in some shorts, and it was just a very pure country style ish type of life at that time. And I always I remember all of the little details that were very meaningful to me, because in my house with my mother and my grandmother, things were very oppressive. The air was real thick most of the time. I grew up in a very hostile, constant battle. My grandmother and my mother didn't get along well at all, and grandmother had a couple of loose screws. It's a long story all on its own, but it was very tense. So when I had the chance to go with my dad, it was very healing of an experience for me. It would give me a chance to release the pressure, and I would spend the weekend with him, and the day would start, and it was just, okay, get up, you brush your teeth, okay, brush your teeth, go play, all right, go play. Well, he would be maybe working in his shop. He was artisan. My dad knew how to do a lot of things, from handyman work, construction, pavement, all kinds of carpentry stuff. But he was very artistic. He was a musician, played the sax. He was into, which is how he made his living, was he would make acrylic plastic lamps, for like ceiling lamps and chandeliers and all kinds of things that he could make with those plastics. And over there, resources were limited, so he had folks, which is how a lot of Cubans live. They do a lot of underground movement in order to survive, because the government doesn't allow you to be a business owner without their say-so, and you can barely be a farmer over there, because if you have too many cows, the government wants to be, in control of that, or you can't have it at all. So whatever. He would have friends in like junkyards of like the buses and stuff like that, and he would grab the glass of the windows of the buses and utilize that as blades to hone down the edge of the plastics. He created molds out of brass, and he had sinks where he had oil, like motor oil, and he would heat up the motor oil to a certain temperature, and he would start softening up the plastic, the acrylic plastic, and then he would place it in molds, and he would create beautiful pieces of art, and that were functional. They were lamps, essentially. They were lighting apparatus, and he also made like little hair holder things. I don't know what they're called, for girls, little girls and women and stuff like that. To this day, I'm positive that all over the island there's a lamp that my dad made, because they were very nice. And he was very popular in his craft, and just as a person, he was very unique as a person. And that I can remember. And he, from my knowledge of him, he grew up obviously during the Castro administration during the Castro regime or whatnot, and he decided very young, early on, because you're forced to join the military at the age of 15 or 16 for military training. It's not an option like in the United States. You have to go in at 16 for a certain amount of time. I don't remember if it's a year or 2 or 3. I don't remember, but you do spend some military time, and he decided the government wanted to send him, I think, to Russia or the Soviet Union. I don't remember, one of those two, to learn how to fly airplanes and how to and teach him how to basically be an engineer to fix certain parts of airplanes for the Cuban government, obviously. But that was all government related, all government controlled. It wasn't like he was gonna have a career. No, he's gonna be a tool of the government. And my dad decided he didn't want to do that very early on. So he automatically got labeled when he left the military. He got labeled as a rebel, what they consider a rebel. The term in Cuba was called worm in Spanish at that time, un gusano, a worm. So that was the term the government would give the rebels, those that were openly opposed to the communism, which was a very ballsy move, because you couldn't say negative things about Castro and the way he was doing things, because you would end up in jail. And the jails in Cuba are not like the jails here in the United States either. Like, you can spend years waiting to to see the judge to see what your sentence is. You know, it's a different situation. It's different. So, not necessarily fair whatsoever. Not to say that what's going on in the United States is fair, but I digress. So he met a woman and had 2 daughters. So I have 2 older sisters by my dad's side at some point in time, and he was there in their life, and he loved them to death. He loved them very much. And then sometime later he met my mother. I'm assuming he didn't really know how crazy my mother was, or I'm sorry, Lord. I don't think he knew the entirety of the situation when he got involved with my mother, and essentially getting involved with my mother and my grandmother, right? Because they lived together alone after my uncle and my grandfather both passed away, which I didn't meet either one of them. So for a long time it was just my grandmother and my mother before I was born. So I'm assuming that it was a passionate, heated moment where I was conceived, and now, well, I guess I gotta marry you, and kind of a thing. And I think he married and divorced her within 2 months of me being born, from the stories I was told. So I didn't grow up with him in the household, right? Because that's how it went down. I'm sorry if my storytelling is not, it's kind of all over the place. My brain's kind of funny. So going to my dad's every weekend, it was a very unique thing it was very unique for me, because it was so different and so liberating than what I was used to at my mother's house. remember fishing with him for the first time. I remember that day when we went. You know, it was like, "You're hungry?" And there was nothing else and to eat. It was one of those days, you know, where like his hookup, one of those weekends where his hookup didn't come through, and you know, we didn't even have eggs or anything, or we might have eaten eggs in the morning or something like that. But it was like lunchtime or dinner time, and everything was an adventure, you know. It was like a fun experience. Everything was an experience, you know, with my dad. And he grabbed me and he goes, "Come on, we're gonna fish. We're gonna go fish today." And I goes like, "Okay," you know. And I love my dad, so you know, it was, I'm just remembering. Okay. I enjoyed spending time with my dad, you know. So he grabbed me and we went to one of our neighbors because it was a very, it's like a town. It was very old school type of lifestyle, you know, where everybody got along, and you know, it was just much different than I'm sure it is now because of the necessity and how slimy people have become as humans. But at that time, it was very reminiscent of 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 a place where I live now, and it was a very wholesome, and everybody was very neighborly. And he grabbed me and we went to one of our neighbors' house behind, and the other block, and the guy literally bred worms off of his ground in his field in a certain area, so you could dig the ground and the worms will come up. So he borrowed a jar. He didn't have any fishing poles either. He borrowed them from the neighbor, from the guy. You know, they were all cool folks. You know, everybody. I don't remember the faces or the names of everyone, but what I do remember is the heart. You know, where everybody was at. You know, it was just a very loving, very friendly, almost like family type of feeling, type of vibe. And he grabbed a couple poles, fishing poles with the lines and everything, and grabbed one of the guy's jars and filled it up with worms. And and there we went. Took a little hike towards a little river that was near where he lived, and everything was either a walk or a bike ride, you know, at that time. You know, it was fun. It was cool. We didn't have a horse or anything, but it was cool. Everything was an adventure, you know. So we get there, you know, and he's setting it up, and he's showing me how to put the worm on the hook, and you know, he set up the hook for me and stuff, and he gave me the pole, and that was one of the happiest memories, you know, you could have as a child. You know, is catching your first fish, you know. And like, I don't remember if he caught one first or if I caught one first, but I caught one, you know. And it was super exciting because I was like, oh, you know. I felt it on the hook, and he was like, pull, and I pulled, and I grabbed it out of the water. And I was like flipping it everywhere because I didn't know what I was doing. So he was laughing, and he brought it in, and we got 2 fish. He caught one and I caught one. And then we went back home, you know, with the rods and the fish on the hooks, and we went back home. We didn't have a cooler or anything. And when we got home, he told me, okay, this is dinner. And I was like, okay. all right. And and he did the thing. I don't remember all the details on how he did it, but I know we ate those fish that day for lunch or dinner. It was like after lunch, and and that was a fun day for me as a child. I'll never forget. And there was this other time, I guess around in Cuba they celebrate some sort of a Christmas. I guess that Christmas is actually a thing at that time, which is tradition for a lot of folks, right? I don't celebrate Christmas now, but at that time, that was a thing. Cubans didn't really celebrate Christmas the way Americans celebrate Christmas, but it was a festive time, around the end of the year. And my dad found one of his hookups. He managed to give him about six geese, 6 or 7 geese, and they were little, and he like fed them, and I think he either ended up trading for food or for money, or he ended up giving some away once they got big enough. But he kept one. I remember he ended up giving them away, and he kept one that I kept seeing every time I would come to his house in the weekends, and he named them, and the goose name was Pancho, because he was a meaty sucker, man. He was a big bird, and he named him. I mean, I was a kid, so to me, like the bird was like my size. He was a big bird, Pancho, and he walked funny, He walked like a big fat guy, and he would take him, down the block, like on a walk, like he's walking a dog, We would go, and it was fun. He was showing the whole neighborhood, yeah, that's Pancho right there, making jokes and just like, fellowshipping, I guess, with the neighbors, and then one weekend I came, and Pancho was no longer there, and I didn't notice. Right at first. Around dinner time, dinner came, and it just came to me. And I asked my dad right across the table from me, and my grandmother, his mom, was sitting next to me, and the food was great. It was delicious. It was juicy, and we had rice and beans, which Cubans eat a lot. And I asked my dad, hey, whatever happened to Pancho, in Spanish? And my dad looked at me and he goes, you're eating him. And like, I paused for a second, and like, he said it in a very natural way, and I paused for a second, and it's like my brain was I was just downloading the information, It's like, we liked Pancho was fun, but he's food, and then my dad, like, he saw my wheels turning, and he goes, it's tasty, right? And I go, yeah, it is tasty. That was the end of the conversation. So like, it was just things like that. Like, my dad was showing me, listen, this is part of life, right? This is how life works. You raise animals that you eat, So I understood that from my father, from my dad. Other instances, which one should I say first? So my dad liked, when I would walk with him in public, he would leave his hand down his arm down with his finger like that, or he would leave two fingers out like that, and he wouldn't hold my arm. My dad would never hold my arm unless it was like, like I'm literally gonna step in front of a car or something, which that wasn't the case. My dad would lay out his two fingers and I would grab his two fingers, and that's how I would walk with my dad. And anytime I was curious, I would let go, look at something, come back, and hold on to his fingers. And he explained to me at that time, when I was a child, he explained to me that he had read books when he was younger on parenting. And what he learned was that you should allow your child to have that sense of protection, of safe haven protection, but have the freedom to explore. It was a very philosophical thought, and very logical too, and on parenting. And I remember that portion that he explained to me. We would walk a lot, and he would tell me things. Because I asked him, he's like, why? I think I asked him, why don't you give me? Why do you give me your finger? And he explained that to me. And the little things like that, little details like that, always, I will never forget. Like his way of teaching. It was like, yeah, you protect your child from the dangers that he doesn't understand, but you got to give him enough freedom for them to develop as a human being. You got to give them the freedom for them to learn. Like sticking something in the electric outlet, right? Which I did. He had these little scissors that he would use, I guess, to clip his ear hairs or whatever, and in his house. And he saw the intentions, because you know how you know what your kid's up to. You just see him moving around, and I'm there being sneaky, and I'm very young, but again, these are experiences that I never forget because they're very meaningful. I'm very young. Like, I must be like really young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, maybe 4, I don't remember. But so he told me several times, maybe two times he told me. It's like, don't put the scissor in the outlet because you're gonna get electrocuted. He explained it to me, and I was like, but I was so curious with that outlet, so curious. And I would put the little scissor back, and then I would go back around trying to be sneaky. And on the third time, he saw me do it. He saw me, but he didn't say anything. And I went and I stuck it in. When I stuck it in, I got electrocuted, and I freaked out. And I looked at him, and he looks at me and tells me, in Spanish, tells me, "You learned? Like you learned? You understand it now? And I'm like, and then again, going back to that, he knew that the outlet wasn't going to kill me, but it was going to be enough of an impact for me to understand what he was telling me. Just A+ parenting right there, and it's just so wonderful to have good memories like that. The bitter part starts afterwards. Bitter for me because for many years I blamed him for stuff, and I couldn't understand. It's not to excuse him and certain decisions that he made, concerning his life and concerning being in my life, but but I understand better now. So he got the ability to come to the United States legally and bring me, my mother, and my grandmother. We weren't really the first choice. Of course, he went to his two older daughters first, because they were his heart, you know. They were already kind of grown, and they were starting their life, and they had meaningful men in their life and stuff like that, and they were already on a route to do things, and they decided not to come to the States with him. They stayed behind, and only to be here in the United States later on, but it's another story. So we were, I was the second choice, you know. Second, he could bring like 3 or 4 members, like 3 members, or was it 2? I know my grandmother by my mom's side wasn't supposed to come, and his mother didn't want to come either, and he didn't care to bring her anyway. Now my dad was like 16 years older than my mom, so he was already an older gentleman, you know. When I was 9 years old, 9 years old, which is when we got to the United States. 1990 Christmas, turning 1991. So I got here 9-10 years old, and he was already in his, I want to say late 50s or 60 years old. He was already up there, or mid 50s. I can't remember. Probably mid 50s, because my mother was 35. Yeah, like mid to late 50s. And so we get to the state. We get to the States, which was another extremely memorable part of my life. Getting to the United States, and everything felt like Christmas. We literally got to the States on Christmas, like like a month before the New Year. So it was very meaningful for me as a child. My distant cousins, which we ended up staying in New Jersey, which is where a lot of Cubans would go at that time, or before that, parts of New Jersey, Bergen Line and Union City. If you know, you know. So we stayed there, and it was just a beautiful time. Eventually, my mother and my dad weren't back together. We just got together for the process of coming to the States and leaving the island. Eventually, within that year, we ended up moving out of his family members' place, and we got our own apartment, and it was cool. We got cable, and there was food all over the fridge, and we had cereal boxes. We had so much stuff. It was so overwhelming, and it was a beautiful time. For a period of time, it was a beautiful time in my life. And video games and Nintendo, and all the things that a kid could ever imagine. And then a few months after that, we were already living in that apartment. My dad got a gig that was as a restoring old buildings, and it was a company that would have contracts all over the United States, restoring buildings and houses and historical places and stuff like that. And he got a contract to go to New Orleans, which was, I didn't know what it was at that time, but I learned afterwards. New Orleans was a very attractive place for him, because there's a lot of musicians out there, and jazz music and blues, and it was a place I haven't visited to this day, but I understand what it is. And so that time it was, and he spent a lot of time out there. He left us basically. He left us. So my mother was stuck working in some kind of a factory. This was when my mother was still working. Before he left, my mother was actually in the bottom of the building. There was a cosmetology class, and she was taking that class. But when he left, she couldn't finish that, and she had to start working to pay the bills by herself, basically, because my grandmother didn't work. And it was. I remember that part being real tough for her. She had to take like 2 buses and a train just to get to the part of New Jersey where she worked in a factory. I forgot what it was. She was putting things together. I don't know if it was toys. I don't remember what it was, but I know it was tough. And she immediately got frustrated. And after a good bit of, again, being back to ground zero, which is my grandmother and my mother not getting along, things started to get dark. Then my mother found out about government assistance, and she found out about Miami, Florida, and from some other friends of ours that had came to the United States from Cuba. And so she learned about this, and she gathered up, everything, and she said, we're moving to Miami, we're moving to Florida. And I'm a kid, so I don't have a say-so or anything. My grandmother ended up coming with us. I don't remember in the bus or afterwards. I think she came afterwards. And immediately she found out about the government assistance. So as soon as we got to the States, she looked that up, and if she had another job or two for a little bit was too many, because as soon as she found that out, I also had developed at this time, turning 11, 12, I have developed already like nerve issues. I had from stress, from high levels of stress. So like kind of like PTSD kind of a thing from being on constant levels of stress. My hands would peel, and I had a lot of dandruff, and she ended up taking me to, I wasn't paying any attention in school. School was extremely difficult for me. On many levels, socially, and and as far as learning and things like that, it was extremely difficult because I was in my head and stressed the whole time for everything. So she takes me to the doctor to see what's going on with me, and the doctor ends up telling her that I have signs of stress. These are symptoms of stress, of high levels of stress. So whatever, that was what was going on. So she learned about that, and basically sat on her ass, and I was just dealing with life. My dad wasn't in the picture for I wouldn't see him for like several years, and at some point he would show up back, and he would end up back in the area where we were at in Miami. And at this point he's living a very careless life. I don't know if I don't think he was into like the heavier drugs, but he definitely drank a lot, and the cigarettes is what killed him. Just like his father from emphysema, they both died from the same thing, chronic smoking. And so he was already sick. He had dropped a lot of weights. He was very skinny, and I was already older. there was so many details, but long story short, we end up living together again. My grandmother, my mother, and my dad in the projects at the time, which was government housing. I'm already a barber. I'm already cutting hair at the barber shop. I had my first motorcycle, and he was already sick. Before we managed to get out of the projects to move to a bigger place where we could all be in the same place. It was just my dad at that point, and my grandmother was already at the point where she was gonna end up in a home because she couldn't stay by herself. So my mother was trying, utilizing nothing but government help because she doesn't have a job or anything, and I'm not yet getting paid like that, in order to help everybody out. So the plan was to all move to a bigger apartment where everybody can have their own room. I shared a room with my mom. My grandmother had her own room. She had a nurse come like every other day or so and check her out, or every day for a while. The government was paying for all of that. So my grandmother needed her own room and stuff. And my dad didn't make it to that apartment right away because his emphysema got really bad, and that was a very hard time for me, because I had to witness what he witnessed with his dad. Just, it was really sad. Just, he had a tube down his throat, and then they opened up his they open you up here, right on your throat, to connect a valve that allows you to breathe. It breathes for you. Hooked up to IVs and stuff, and half unconscious half the time. They start pumping you with like steroids and all kinds of steroids and things like that to keep your lungs, to fortify your lungs. But it was a really hard time. I got tired of visiting him and seeing him in that state. He was for weeks, almost about a month, in intensive care. And eventually I stopped visiting him. Then they moved him to a rehab hospital, and closer to the beach, miles away from where we were. And there, I guess he started to make some progress. And after months, this took months, almost a year. After months, my mother told me, you should go see your dad. He's doing better. And I was like, oh, really? It's like, yeah. She reminded me a couple times, and then me and a buddy of mine, he took me, and we went. And when I get there, he looks alive, like he's up and up. He still has the valve on his neck, but he was always very cheerful, very funny, He made a joke about anything. and you can't talk when you have that valve, because it restricts your vocal cords. I think it's like a little pouch, and inflates and deflates. You have to deflate it in order for you to use your vocal cords again, something like that. So then he was like, while the nurse was like adjusting the valve so that he can talk, and because he didn't need to be plugged in the whole time. At this point, he was only plugged in at night to sleep. And he looks at me with a smile, and he goes, wait a minute, hold on. And when the nurse adjusts the valve or whatever, he goes, ta-da! That was after months of not seeing him. That was his response, and it was awesome. It was a miracle. It really was a miracle, and I understand that now. That was the first time that happened to him, and obviously after that he wasn't 100%. He did manage to get. He didn't smoke anymore, which was a challenge, and he did manage after months. We all moved in together. that time I'm the only one paying the bills, and I'm not in the best state of mind at this time. I'm I'm not doing the greatest, emotionally, mentally. I'm the only one working, and things are starting to. This was a moment in my life where the Father was working with me and reshaping a lot of things, and it wasn't easy. And so he starts making progress, and he starts like to get back on his bicycle and riding his bicycle. He showed up to my barbershop, which was like to the barbershop where I worked, which was like a couple of miles, maybe 2 or 3 miles away. It was a nice ride, you know. He managed to get up off his little chair, and he could walk around now for some extended periods of time, and he managed to get on the bicycle, and he rode his bicycle with his tube strapped to the back of the bicycle, for oxygen. He managed to ride the bicycle all the way to the shop and back. And he came by and said hi, and I was like, oh, that's awesome, that's good. And then as he was feeling a little bit better, old habits started to overtake him coming back. So started smoking his cigarettes again and started gambling. My dad had a gambling problem, from what I understand. Just like my grandfather, just like his dad, had a gambling problem. So he gambled. He was under government assistance, and we utilized my grandmother's check and his check just to pay the rent, and I was paying the rest of the bills. That was fine in the beginning, right before the inflation hit, and rent got more expensive. Now I'm paying half of the rent and the rest of the bills. So, but he ended up gambling the half of the rent money. First time, my mother was, she was going crazy, and she was upset because he had done that, and she managed, the first time she managed to get the government to give the money back. He did it again he did it, and after that, he couldn't, the government wasn't buying it, so we couldn't pay the bills if that was going on. I wasn't getting paid enough to do all of that, and again, I wasn't in the best state of mind either. So that's where things started getting really crazy. My mother got to the point where she was like, we can't live here anymore, and I'm not dealing with this anymore, and we all split it off. My grandmother went to a home, an old people home. My grandmother had became a citizen all on her own, and she had her government assistance. So my grandmother was good to go in that sense, but she died basically in the, living with strangers, So, and then my dad ended up getting help too, and he was able to live on his own. And me and my mother, we ended up basically in the streets. The government gave her a voucher for about a year to live in a motel, out of all things, in a sleazy motel out there. And it was a really dark time. Like I mentally felt, spiritually and mentally felt like I was dying, like I was plugged to an IV. Like, it was a really dark time for me, and I resented my dad for not being in my life to help me a lot, and for the choices he made, and I resented my dad a lot on things. But I share all that because there was some very positive aspects of my relationship with my father, and they were meaningful, and I know that he meant them. My mother would try not to speak negative of him. and she would tell me that he did love me in his own way. I never understood what that. I never understood what that meant because I didn't understand what that meant. You know, I didn't really understand much what love meant either. You know, because my house was a war zone. So, you know, all I knew is that I was looking for him my whole life. I was looking for my dad my whole life. And certain men in my life, you know, as a teenager, preteen, teenager growing up, I would look up to and became, for periods of time, became father figures to me. An old outlaw motorcycle motorcycle club member guy, an older guy, which my dad met too, by the way, which is funny. You know, I was one of the strongest male figures in my life. I put my pants up and bought boots because of that man. You know, after growing up out of my childhood childishness, you know, several couple of men in my life. But I was always looking for him. I never understood why he wasn't more involved, and it hurt. It hurt because I needed that guidance. You know, I understand now. The Father became that for me. My Creator, Yah, God. He became that for me, that Father. Because that's what He was all along. So I know that there was purpose in me not being able to find what I found in my dad. In a man, because I learned it. Anything, any virtue that I may have as a man, or as a father, as a human being, as a husband, it's been all through the Spirit, through the Holy Spirit. Because my dad's parenting pretty much stopped, you know, when in the end of me being a child. So, and again, I resented a lot of his decisions. But now that I'm older, I kind of understand. I know that he must have been a man of frustrations, and for many frustrations due to the political situation and the heartache of like knowing that there's so much that you can't do for those that you love. That's frustrating, and it can depress you for not feeling like you're able to do good things for those that you care about, because you just can't. So I can imagine that those frustrations led him into a mental state of fuck it, you know, because I now understand you know what that feels like. But in life, you can't just say fuck it all the time. I can't say fuck it to my family, my wife, and my kids. I can't do that. So, if anything, one thing that my dad, the biggest lesson that he left behind for me was never leave the blessing that you have. Never leave your child, your children, looking for you. looking for what you're supposed to be in their life. Be there. Just, if you can't do anything at all, just show up. Just show up. Show up. Show it up. It's one of the most meaningful things you could ever do for your child, for your family. If you can't do anything else, at least show up. Get up and show up. Because the heart of those that care about you, they love you and they would rather have you there. The minimalist thing means more to them than you not being there at all. So yeah, that's the biggest lesson I learned from my biological father. And I wanted to share that. So I pray that whoever you are, wherever you are at in your life, I'm always going to tell you this. It's a reminder. Be grateful. Because you have a lot. Even if you don't see it right away, you might have grown cold and bitter to the point where you can't see what you have. But I can guarantee you always have something. You always have a blessing. And the Father will always put somebody there to help you. Somebody there that truly cares. And believe it or not, there's always going to be somebody looking up to you. A potential for you to do the smallest act that will mean the world to the least of these, to who you least expect. It could be a little boy looking at you, a little girl. You know, try to be grateful for the blessing of life, the things that the Father has given you, and try to grow to the maturity in understanding that even those negative things that put a dent in your brain in a painful way, those things hold lessons as well. Nothing is thrown away. Everything means something that you learn in your life. So if I can leave you with that, sorry for my weird storytelling. I'm doing the best I can. I suppose I'll get better at these as I go along. So I pray today is a good day for you, whatever day it may be. I pray that you look up to the sky, you look up with your spirit and acknowledge your Creator. And I pray that you ask your Creator questions wholeheartedly, as I remind you that anything that you ask the Father through His Son, Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, anything you ask Him according to His riches in glory, He will grant you. He will show Himself to you if you ask Him to and you mean it. Because no one else knows you. Not even you know you like He knows you. So bless you and wonderful day.